Our club's always been a forum for visionaries, public figures, and decision makers to command attention to the issues of our time and inform the most relevant, compelling, and challenging conversations. Here we offer first-person access to dynamic political, business, and public personality.
The Canadian Club is one of the most important podiums anywhere in the world that a Canadian can speak to, tell Canadians what it is that they think, develop those thoughts. And so I want to thank you for that very, very much.
Please join me in thanking our esteemed panelists today.
Through our programs and events, including our youth and young leaders programs, our diversity partnerships, our joint events, and our media and social media opportunities, we offer you access to dynamic political, social, and business figures from abroad and right here at home.
The platform from which the eloquence of Canada has flowed all of that time, whether it be business, education, politics, sports, arts, and culture. If someone wants to say something to Canadians about this country and about the future of this country, this is the venue you choose.
Good evening. Good evening. So much energy in here tonight. It's so exciting. Thank you so much. Thank you for your attention. Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to this incredible sold-out event. And welcome, because of that, to those joining us remotely. My name is Michael Liebrock, Director of the Canadian Club, and your host this evening. We acknowledge that the land we are on is the traditional territories of many Indigenous people, and we are grateful for the opportunity to live, thrive, and work together on these lands today. Thank you for joining us this evening for what promises to be a dynamic and revealing conversation about how the Conservative Party of Canada is doing things differently with a fresh new approach which is based on common sense values, approaches, and policies. How will this new focus impact Canadian politics in the future? That's what we'll explore this evening. Given this event sold out almost immediately, and those who are joining online, I know that you, our audience, also want to know this too. First, a few messages of note. We're delighted to have many generous sponsors tonight supporting this sold-out event. Thank you to TD, Jenny Byrne and Associates, Rogers, Canada Life, and TC Energy for making this gathering possible. I would also like to acknowledge the contributions of our season sponsor, the Canadian Bankers Association, and our official airline sponsor, Air Canada. Canada's Forest Trust has joined us again, and we appreciate your partnership. If you're like me, you've got questions for our panelists. A selection of rising stars of the Conservative movement. What's new and what's different in what the party stands for? How does the party plan to move from official opposition to lead the nation? And what are the ideas that are lighting up the nation to unprecedented levels of support? But before we introduce this evening's panel, I invite those who are able to stand and join me in our traditional toast to Canada. To Canada.
Canada.
Thank you. And now I am pleased to introduce our esteemed panelists. You'll learn more about them through the discussion, I'm sure, but to get us started in quasi-alphabetical order, Adam Chambers. Adam is a member of Parliament representing Simcoe North on Lake Huron. He is the Shadow Minister of Revenue and a member of the House of Commons Standing Committee on Finance. Before his life as an MP, Adam was a finance executive at one of Canada's largest life insurance companies, as well as a lawyer at a Bay Street law firm. He also served as Director of Policy for the former federal finance minister, the late Jim Flaherty. Wow. Melissa Lantsman. Melissa is a member of Parliament for Thornhill and appointed by Pierre as Deputy Leader of the Conservative Party of Canada. First elected in 2021, she previously served as the Shadow Minister of Transport, and she was also a senior advisor to leading political figures. Melissa is an award-winning communicator and was a regular TV commentator and has been featured in Canada's most popular publications. And today, her social media presence engages record audiences with her insight and incisive commentary. Melissa. Shuv Majumdar. Following the tradition. Shuv was elected Member of Parliament for Calgary Heritage in a 2023 by-election. For over 2 decades, Shuv has dedicated his career to advancing the causes of freedom and security in Canada and across the world. He brings experience in foreign policy, national security, and international business issues, and a 25-year history with the Conservative movement. Shuv. And finally, Sabrina Mado. Born and raised in Richmond Hill, Sabrina is one of Canada's most read political columnists and National Magazine Award winner. Sabrina has become a leading voice for a new generation of Conservatives, with her work having appeared in print and broadcast outlets, including the Globe and Mail, the Toronto Star, CTV News, TVO's The Agenda, and BNN Bloomberg. She is running to be the next Conservative candidate in Richmond Hill in the next election, and I'm sure would welcome your help if you're interested in seeing her after the panel is done. Ladies and gentlemen, Sabrina. Moderating this evening's discussion is Ginny Roth, partner at Crestview Strategy. Prior to joining the Crestview team, Ginny worked at Queen's Park as an organizer for the Progressive Conservative Party of Ontario and has been a lifelong political activist. Ginny. Members and guests, I invite you to engage with the event on your social media networks. We'd appreciate a post, a tweet, or some sharing of tonight's commentary and what we go through tonight. But at this time, I'm pleased to turn the Canadian Club podium over to Ginny and our panelists. Ginny?
Thank you, Michael. Before we get started, I just wanted to acknowledge there's an MP here, Kevin Vuong, welcome. And I noticed a number of former dignitaries, MPs, senators, et cetera. So I'm really glad you're all here, and I'm glad there was so much interest in this event, which I think speaks to, as Michael said, a real desire to understand where the country's going and what this rising movement means for our futures, our collective futures. So let me set the stage a bit, because there's a question of what new means. And I think a lot of it is about youth and demographic change. The media reported this week that, according to Stats Canada, for the first time, millennials outnumber baby boomers in Canada. I think that's pretty significant, and I think we'll get into that. At the same time, the Conservative Party, if you believe the polls and the trends, which are appearing to be pretty consistent, is leading not only not only baby boomers and Gen X, but also millennials and even Gen Z. So there seems to be a movement to that trend, not just a sort of a return to the old Conservative coalition. And then, and you can see this looking at the stage, I think maybe more now than 75 members of the Conservative caucus in Ottawa are born 1979 or later, which happens to be also the year that the leader Pierre Poilievre was born, who's 44, putting them all at that age or under, which has an impact on public policy development, on communication style, and on direction. So that's what we're going to get into. So I think I'm going to start with you, Adam. We'll get right into it and get into the issues. With your private sector experience, facility talking about fiscal issues, you, much like Pierre Poilievre, took to the problem of inflation early. Can you talk a bit about how the Conservatives were on that issue before it really broke out into a sort of crisis mode, and what that's meant for the movement?
Sure. If you think back to 2020, the early days of COVID, nobody really knew what was going to happen. Some very extraordinary measures were taken. There was a number of people, weeks in the early months after, that said, look, You increase the M2 money supply like you're purporting to do, it will lead to inflation. And this wasn't just in the side corners of the internet or people in Twitter with red eyes that, were pro-Bitcoiners. These are people like Larry Summers, one of the smartest progressive economists in the United States, that said, look, the kind of money that the government is effectively printing and putting into the economy and the way they're going to do it will lead to inflation. Pierre, as a leader, was one of the only Canadian politician talking about it, and one of the very few Canadian kind of economists or those that follow the markets that were on this issue early. So I think that's given him significant credibility as the leader of the party to talk about, okay, well, now how do you deal with inflation? One of the differences that Canada's taken since, or compared to other countries, almost every other country did some form of energy rebate, right? One of the main drivers of inflation is the price of energy. In fact, Canada's actually gone the exact opposite. Every April 1st, we actually increase the price of energy by increasing the carbon tax. Some provinces have reduced taxes, of course. Germany, the UK, they actually gave rebates at point of purchase. But Canada's actually, under this government, committed to making energy more expensive, which is one of the things that's driving inflation. And you have to remember, inflation was running at 5.5% before the war in Ukraine started. So that's not the sole purpose, and supply chains aren't the sole purpose for inflation like some would like to have you believe. So I think that's one of the big differences between our party and the current government, and the fact that our leader was on this 3, 4, 5 weeks after the government started taking extraordinary measures gives him and the party credibility to talk about how to deal with it.
One of the areas where we see inflation being really persistent is in housing, which many would describe as a bubble, a persistent bubble, and where this issue of too much money chasing too few goods is made manifest in very, very real terms. Sabrina, you were at the forefront, speaking of getting on an issue early. You used your column in Choose to talk about that before it was really a crisis. So frankly, I think it was a crisis and people weren't wising up to it. It may be in part because politics is dominated by homeowners. You're not a homeowner and you talk about that openly. Give us a sense of what made you get on that issue early? How has your thinking evolved? Do you hear about it at the doors today? What role has housing played in the growing conservative movement?
Yeah, I got on the issue early because, like you said, it's personal for me. I'm a renter, a millennial who's been locked out of homeownership, and many of my friends have been as well. And the ones that have been able to afford homes, it often has come through inheritance or family money, or they've had to move hours outside of the GTA or even out of the country to afford homes and be able to raise their young families. So seeing the impact not only on myself, but on my social circles, on their families, on their communities, was really why I started covering it. And since then, the issue's only expanded. What was once an issue that impacted mostly young people now impacts every demographic. When I knock on doors, you hear seniors who want to be able to downsize in their communities, but they have nowhere to go. You hear parents of children who, I was knocking on a door the other day, said, my 7 and 8-year-old, we're already preparing them that they're not going to be able to live in the GTA. They're not going to be able to live in Aurora because they're not going to be able to afford it, and we can't afford to buy a home for them in advance. Families who do own their homes, not able to make their mortgage payments or who are struggling and also thinking of moving away, which is also resulting in massive brain drain of young professionals from the area. Pierre was he was the first leader to acknowledge this issue and start listening to young people, and he's been on it ever since, and that's part of why I think we've seen this real energy behind the current Conservatives from young people who felt ignored by other parties and other leaders for so long, and finally someone listened to them and is actually presenting real solutions rather than just holding press conferences on the issue.
Melissa, I have another question for you, but first I just want to build on that a bit. On Pierre's leadership campaign, on Mr. Poilievre's leadership campaign, there was an open discussion of, how do you tackle this housing issue? And I think there were people all over the place, and frankly in column pages as well, who said, well, you can't touch this issue because current homeowners are too sensitive to it. Boomers are the ones that vote. Older voters are reliable voters, and you can't afford to upset those voters, and it's just too politically toxic to take the YIMBY route. Obviously, he chose not to, and he kind of went guns blazing forward on building a new coalition. Have you, as an MP in your riding, or from, you travel all over the country meeting Canadians, have you gotten any pushback? Like, are there people who say, come on, like, let's protect the status quo? Like, do the NIMBYs cry out?
Here's some news. Nobody says let's protect the status quo on anything in this country,
Fair.
right? And particularly on housing, because you know what? Like, homeowners have kids. Like, this is their concern. There was a billboard in Toronto that said, "You don't have a home, get richer, parents." That was the advice on home ownership. So of course, everybody talks about the fact that their kids are still either living in their basement or living in a one bedroom or with a bunch of friends, and they're never going anywhere. And it's sort of this rent trap. So no, you're not getting any pushback because they want to see, like, they have one job to do. It is like give their kids some wings so they can fly away and do it with a comfortable retirement. And I think that's what you hear across the GTA, particularly in suburban ridings. So the common wisdom of advice to conservatives about how not to be conservative is often advice that no one should take.
I'm going to stay with you for a minute, Melissa. Speaking of the GTA and other urban areas, it's also been sort of gospel for conservatives over the last number of years to say, like, let's not worry too much about the cities. Sure, we need to win, conservatives need to win some suburban seats to form government, but you're just never going to do well in urban areas, and so why focus on urban issues? And now I think you're seeing, if you take transit, you're seeing homelessness issues. There's a lot of talk from the conservatives about drug and addictions, which historically would not have been an issue that conservatives would have focused on. Why is that? What is making the caucus and the movement turn to some of these urban issues, and how is it being received?
So here's a short answer. Partly because they're not exclusive to downtown big urban areas anymore. They're now become suburban issues. They've moved up with transit lines, and we see different populations move into suburbs or further away from city centers, either because of affordability or because work allows you to do that. So I don't think you've got you don't have just the downtown east side of Vancouver or down in Moss Park. If we're talking about Toronto, we have it everywhere. In fact, there is an encampment under the 407 in Thornhill, which it's not big, but that is something that you would have never heard of. So I'll go back for a second. I was talking with a friend, and I do a lot of social videos, and we were going through the newspaper on a certain amount of time. I think it was 4 or 6 months, and we were just listing off the violence on the TTC. So I'm somebody who takes the TTC. I'm a big baseball fan, go to a lot of baseball games. The TTC is the best way down here. So started looking through it. Went through the articles, came to, I'm like, I can't make this video. And they're like, why? I'm like, I don't make 5-minute videos. And it was like stabbings and random violence and swarming attacks in Toronto. So of course we have to talk about crime because people feel unsafe. And I don't know that you can attribute it to one factor, but there are certainly some things that we can fix. We've got weak bail reform. We've got something called C-75. You don't have to remember the bill numbers. Just think of it as the frequent flyer program, i.e. people are right through the justice system. They get arrested, they're out the next day, often reoffending. We've got C-5, call it Netflix and chill. They get house arrest for really violent crimes. We've got repeat violent offenders committing crime. And the good news in Canada is that we don't have necessarily a lot of criminals. They just keep doing crime. And so there's ways to stop that. And just finally on the addiction, not to hog the panel, but I think conservatives need to attack this issue. I think it is one of the issues in Canada that has been so grossly mismanaged. And if you do one thing and you don't do all of the other things, then you have a population that is being given taxpayer-funded drugs and is never going to get help. We have street-level palliative care, basically, in this country. And if you do not have treatment and supports and transitional housing, and you don't talk about it head-on in a compassionate way, what you are going to see is Moss Parks pop up everywhere, and we are starting to see that. And I think there is a new generation of conservatives, and particularly a leader who is compassionate on this issue and so many others, that we're not afraid to talk about these issues, because what we're doing right now is cuckoo bananas.
Yeah.
Speaking of fearlessness, Shuv, let's zoom out a bit. You've been talking about some of the crises around the globe for a long time, and not only that, but actually being there and rolling up your sleeves and doing the hard work. We are in a really uncertain time. If you listen to experts who follow in foreign policy, they say it's one of the toughest times they can remember. And the open question I think a lot of Canadians have is, what role do we play in that? Not only what role do we play in defending democracies against dictators and terrorists abroad, but also what role do those risks play here, and how do we protect against foreign interference and all those, some of those crises coming to our shores? So I'd love for you to just talk about how the conservative movement's addressing those today, if it's changed, if the youth in the movement is making us approach those issues differently, and where you think it's going.
I take heart in knowing that it wasn't just democracies that won the rivalries and the wars of the last century. It was conservatives as well. It was Sir Winston Churchill that was recruited from outside the establishment after experiments with appeasement failed to lead the Western world to victory in the Second World War. In the Cold War, they were conservatives like Margaret Thatcher, Ronald Reagan, who came from outside their establishments to restore first principles and win the Cold War. And at the core of what they did was remind their country, and the elite in their country especially, that their country is a country. We're not a postmodern utopia, and that our country has actual interests. And those interests, if we serve them well, then we will find ways to unlock the kind of strength and prosperity that is needed in the world today. Taking a step back, Ginny, when President Biden withdrew out of Afghanistan, he signaled to our rivals that Pax Americana had come to an end. He signaled to the world that in Beijing and in Moscow, now's the time for you to sow chaos around the world. And if you're sitting in those capitals and looking at any of the G7 capitals, you're not thinking about what Justin Trudeau's doing any given minute. He's not consequential to you. America is in disarray. The United Kingdom is in disarray. France is in disarray. Germany is in disarray. And as the rivals that we've had are emboldened by their ambition, they've done a series of things. They started after the retreat of Afghanistan to, in 2020, impose a national security law on the people of Hong Kong. And what was our Western response? It was pretty muted. After that, they accelerated their invasion of Ukraine in Russia and their ambition all the way to Kiev with battalions of people marching for victory. And what was the Western response initially? It was, hey, Zelensky, we got a flight for you to get out. The instinct has always been appeasement. And then, of course, months later, we've seen Iran, through their network of proxies across the region, wage war on Israel and their people, first by the horrific attacks on October 7th, and then the subsequent chaos they're sowing across the region, including in the Red Sea and shipping lanes. So what do Moscow, Beijing, and Tehran have in common here? An authoritarian rise while our Western world is woke and broken. And what does that mean to Canada and to young Canadians especially? Is our country has a promise to our people and to the world. We have $3 trillion of natural resource wealth that would fuel, feed, and secure the world today. Our ingenuity, our technologies, are things that would stabilize world supply chains. And guess what? We would make a lot of money so we could fund whatever socialism Jagmeet Singh and Justin Trudeau invent next. So, I would say that one of the biggest decisions that attracted me to put my name on a ballot was watching Pierre Poilievre speak with strength about our Canadian national interest, about our energy proposition, about the ingenuity of our people, and the backbone that we have to get that done. I think a final point, if I might. Our country is presently set to decline as other powers rise in the next 5 to 10 years. The world is massively disrupted and changing so fast that sometimes it feels like we're in a slipstream. I think that if we take the big right decisions early, then our country can restore its place in the world as one of the top 5 economies rather than a middling 10, 12, or 13 that Trudeau's heading us into. So peace through strength, leaders of conviction, these are the things that Canadians are responding to with great numbers today, and I'm very gratified for it.
Great. Adam, let's move back to Canada a little bit. I think I would be remiss if I didn't, given the crowd here today, get into the question of the role of business in our economy. And we talked a bit about, GDP per capita and the affordability issue. Let's talk about GDP. Let's talk about growth a bit. And I think there's a question for people watching Pierre Poilievre and the new movement around this mix of economic populist language and a sort of more old school fiscal conservatism, an economic conservatism. And I wonder how those two things come together in your mind and for the whole caucus and how you think about tackling some of these big issues.
Sure. I mean, I don't think they're contradictory. Rising tide lifts all boats. You can be pro-Canadian. You don't have to be pro-business or pro-worker. You can be pro the economy. What we've been doing, and the results show it, GDP per capita is lower today than it was in 2018. This trajectory will mean we will become, and Shuv just said, a middling country amongst our peers. We have the opportunity to actually change that. Those who care about emissions, as an example, if we displaced 20% of China's coal production with Canadian LNG, we would save the planet the total emissions that Canada as a country generates per year annually. When we first started the climate discussion, everyone said, well, pollution knows no borders. Exactly. So we should be using Canadian LNG to displace dirtier fuel across the world. India is another, probably a more likely example in the short term of where we can do business. But I don't think that it's contradictory to say you have to be one or the other, but pro-work or pro-worker or pro-business. I think we're pro-Canadian, and we're going to do the right thing for Canadians, and by doing the right thing for Canadians, we're going to do the right thing, admittedly, for employers and employees at the same time. People get additional jobs, there's growth, there's bonuses, there's new markets around the world. That's how it's going to happen. You can't exclude one group to the benefit of another, and until we realize that, we'll be continuing to go along the same trajectory.
Okay, I have one more theme, so I'll ask another question. But I'll also just warn you, I think we're going to go to questions from the crowd. I will warn you, I'm going to be a harsh moderator, so if you've got a comment, don't even think about it. These have to be real questions. You'll be booed and shamed by this whole crowd. I'll call them to arms. So.
Is that populism?
Yeah, exactly. Collectivism.
Collectivism.
So let's move away from issues a bit and talk a bit about style. I mean, I think the two are interconnected. I always get a bee in my bonnet when people used to say, the Conservatives have a communications problem. It's like, I think it's bigger than that. But let's talk about communications a little bit. Sabrina, you're a communicator. I think one thing that you all have in common on this stage, and that Pierre Poilievre shares, is a facility for communications, an ability to move around the mediators and speak directly to audiences through social media, in a variety of ways, and to do it in really plain terms, in plain language, as Mr. Poilievre would say. So I'd love for you to just talk a bit about that, and if you agree with that, how that plays out for you now that you put your name on a ballot, and then I'll ask others to comment as well.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with everything you just said. One of the biggest advantages I see from current MPs is how strong communicators you all are, especially the younger MPs, and your prowess on social media. What I hear when I'm at doors, and what I heard before that in my inbox as a newspaper columnist, is people want to feel like politicians are talking with them, not above them or at them. They want to feel heard. And so whether that's in person at an event or at an door or on social media feeds, Conservatives definitely have a unique communication style in that way. when you talk about clear language, it's about using language that anyone can understand, that the person who's renting, who's part of a union, a labor worker, can understand, and they feel like they're part of the conversation rather than looking in from the outside. What we often have seen with Trudeau and the Liberals is, again, they're talking above people rather than trying to have conversations where they're interested in solving the issues of real voters rather than stakeholders.
Melissa, you talked about your social videos.
Yeah, I did. And look, this is to this room. It is exactly like you would talk to any of your clients. It is exactly like you would talk to any of your friends. It is exactly like you would talk to anybody except for your really formal grandparents. It is the way that people communicate. It is the medium by which you use. So we're not doing anything different than what many of us grew up with. So I came of age in a work environment where social blew up. So you have to keep up. There's actually an advantage to MPs coming up the ranks now who are even younger, who don't even know a world without this. So they don't remember the world of like, the Globe and Mail needs a quote by 4 p.m. or it's not getting into print. Like that is crazy. And it doesn't exist anymore. So it's only actually going to get better, and we're going to speak to people in the way that they understand, in the way that we've always spoken to one another, and it works. Surpassing mainstream media today is not extremely difficult, right? That's not where people live. You don't open your door in the morning and get a newspaper. You start to scroll through the various newsletters you're subscribed to, or Twitter, or Insta, or whatever it is that you use, and that's generally where you're getting your five facts. So if you can start to get into people's feeds in a very organic way, I think that works. And then of course the plain language, like it's very simple. One person in this audience actually, when I started consulting, they're like, dress for your client when you go somewhere. So like if you're talking to a bank, like look like them. If you're talking to the boys at Facebook, like wear your gray shirt and your black pants and like talking dude speak. That's exactly it's tailoring the message to the audience that you're speaking to, and making sure that the actual thing that you're saying is consistent right across the board. People aren't stupid. You cannot say something in one room to one group of people and say something the opposite in another group. And we have seen governments do that, and particularly this government do that over and over again. I think people are getting tired of it.
So authenticity is a piece, but what about the message discipline? I'm shocked, by the way, and I might have to call the leader's office. No one here has said the 4-part, what is it? Come on, well, everyone together.
I was waiting till the end.
Everyone together.
We can't. It's a ritual we do.
Yeah.
But message discipline, like slogans, like particularly as we get closer to an election, voters that don't pay close enough attention, or close attention anyway, are going to have a couple takeaways about what a new conservative movement would do differently and stand for. Shuv, is that a challenge? Is that like corralling a big caucus around that? Is that an issue? How do you focus on the things you're willing to focus on and drive that same message over and over again?
Every morning I wake up, I brush my teeth, and I look at what Adam Chambers is doing on social media and try and replicate that. I try and be Adam every day of the week. It's not working out for me, but he puts up with it. Listen, I'm not somebody to speak about communications. I'm not an expert at it at all, but I would say what Pierre usually talks about, Poilievre, he says that simple is not easy, and he's 100% right. Slogans are not slogans for slogan's sake. What he describes simply, axe the tax, build the homes, fix the budget,
there you go.
Stop the crime,
I had to do it.
Is an actual program built upon big ideas. And in each of those 3 words are a whole innovative set of solutions on how we fix Canada. And I don't think, like to Melissa's point, I've never seen an argument won by condescending somebody. Never have I seen that be successful. So by speaking authentically, clearly, and plainly, that's one part of it. But the other part is also believe in things. If you have genuine conviction around what you are saying, if you provide the kind of empathy that people need, because Sabrina's probably noticing on her doors now, I noticed this last year, there is a lot of pain in this country. Every 4th or 5th door in South Calgary people were breaking down at the doors. People can't trust anything anymore. Every institution that was supposed to be an arbiter of public trust, whether it's public health, the media, the academy, you name it, every institution has lost trust. And to restore that trust, to restore that promise, requires being as this is what you're going to get as you can. And I think that's what's resonating in the communications that Landsman and Poilievre especially are so enormously successful at. I hope to replicate it, but like I said, I'm trying to just be like Adam Chambers.
That's a good goal. So on that note, maybe Colin, you can raise your hand if you have a question. Senator Eaton has a question. First hand up.
Defense spending.
These are the lobs.
Something I find very worrying for this country, Pierre's covered all the other things, is defense and how we procure and what we're going to do about that. I think it's a generational question you guys should face up to.
Shuv, do you want to take that one?
Our modern armed forces are completely in ruin because of terrible mismanagement over these last long 8 years. There is huge recruitment problems, huge procurement problems, often because their elected government has got them focusing on projects that have anything to do except for the defense of our country, the contributions to our alliances, and securing our Arctic borders. I have to admit, like, procurement and recruitment are the two big issues. But in the ruin that follows this NDP Liberal legacy is an opportunity to look at the armed forces as something that could be meaningfully engaged in the world beyond for the next 20 to 30 years.
But are you going to do that when you form government?
I don't think you can do any of that before you form government. Poilievre has already said it, right? Just this week, he was out front and center saying we have to rebuild our armed forces. And a big part of that requires having a revenue pool and the discipline around how a government manages its budget to do that. And what kind of procurement that actually satisfies the sovereignty of our country, right? Technology means procurement changes so very much in any given moment. And right now, you have a bunch of bureaucrats that all have veto power over each other.
5 ministries that have to sign off on our defense.
Yeah, everybody has a veto and nobody has a decision-making authority. I think you can expect a government that is not afraid of making decisions.
This is like question period. I love it.
The good senator.
But you get answers here.
Who's that? I think we have another question over there, Colin.
Hi there, panel. My name is Charles Atcham with Canada's National Firearms Association. I've talked to many of you about this topic. Stopping crime. So the Liberals have promised to stop crime by ratcheting it up, stricter and stricter gun controls, gun bans, prohibitions, civil disarmament, and it's not working. Crime is actually up. Now, Pierre, I know, has talked to this already. This is kind of a segue and a kind of a setup, but I know you're planning on doing good things, but our community, the RCMP vetted firearms owners out there, are looking for relief and justice. We've been kicked around for way too long as a wedge issue, and we're not going to take it anymore. So we're hoping that the Conservatives in the future will provide not only relief for us, but also bring in common sense crime control.
Yeah, Melissa, do you want to
Yeah,
take that
sure.
one?
Look, Charles, we've said it. I don't think there's anybody in this room that believes that believes that law-abiding hunters and sports shooters are the issue that is facing the rising tide of crime in this country. Like, I think that's frankly silly and has been proven to be wrong over and over and over again. Common sense crime policy, yes. We mentioned the frequent flyer program and the Netflix and chill laws that the Liberals passed. But there's bigger, deep-seated problems like Shuv talked about. We've got recruitment issues in policing, in serving your own country, in the pride that we have of service. We've got 10 or 15 years of a defund the police movement, which has destabilized, I think, the community relationship with policing. Like there are big problems, and I think one of the things, car theft, of course, is another one. If you've heard, everybody sort of seized with that issue, particularly if you're in suburban Toronto, the Bramptons, in Peel region. Cars get stolen every single day off of a driveway. People feel unsafe. And I think that you need, frankly, the leader with the gall to tackle this. And I think that that's the person who we have leading this party, who is not afraid head on to take on these issues, and fight them in court. And see how far we can get without a Supreme Court smacking down common sense justice reform. I think we've got that guy, Charles.
Okay, I think we have time for one or two more. There has to be a question right here.
Hi, so I'm wondering actually, so you've said that there's been a very large movement by younger people towards the Conservative Party, like Gen Z and millennials, which traditionally lean more liberal. I was kind of wondering, a lot of the recent surveys actually seem to indicate that a lot of that movement isn't because they find the Conservatives appealing, it's because they find the Liberals and NDP so incompetent. So
it's true.
So do you think there's like going to be a stickiness to these, to the younger generation to continue voting Conservative if the Liberals ever actually get their act together?
Adam, do you want to? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, look, you have to, it's one thing to capture frustration. The other thing is you have to deliver. But February of last year, since then, or actually, yeah, February of last year, consistently Conservatives have pulled ahead of the Liberals in the sub 30 and sub 40 category on a monthly basis. That's actually never happened before. I think it's primarily about housing, but you also have to remember a bunch of young people were just told for 2 years that they had to put their life on pause for a virus that wasn't really going to affect them, but they had to do it for the good of the community. Now, they did everything we asked them to do. They stayed home, they put their life on hold, they got the vaccine, they did everything. Then they reemerged to find houses is completely unaffordable, the economy is completely different, and by the way, now we just doubled the national debt, and they're responsible for paying for it. So of course they're frustrated. So I think we have to end up delivering, but it's not a surprise to me that young people look at the world today and say, I'm kind of looking for something different.
Just hoping you can talk a little bit about the brain drain, and I think a big part of that is kind of the marginal tax rates in Canada, the top marginal brackets, and that's not necessarily an easy topic to touch from a political perspective, but how do we as Conservatives kind of make the case for lower top marginal tax brackets? And yeah, I'd like your thoughts on that.
It's not an easy topic, but there has been some discussion of tax reform.
Do you want to start?
Sure. Look, the movement for the current government is kind of like this soak the rich mentality. Luxury tax, you've got more, everyone has more. Except the lion's share of taxes are actually paid by people in the top. Now, I don't think you can run a campaign. I don't think it would actually be smart to say, hey, you know what we need to do is lower taxes. Like, I actually don't think that's right for the economy either, to say, hey, we just need to take the top bracket down. If you consider the US, most people in the top bracket actually aren't the same people every year. There's significant amount of turnover in the top bracket. What that means, though, is people see themselves potentially in that top bracket every year. So I think you have to provide a little bit of tax relief for everybody. The leader says often make work pay. It should be advantageous to have a job. It should be advantageous to go out and get a paycheck. That's why there's a bit of a pushback amongst Conservatives on universal basic income. It's important. There's a lot of productive work that has to get done. We don't need to pay people to leave the workforce, but we need to kind of dial down the rhetoric on successful individuals and thinking that they're all of a sudden going to solve the budgetary crisis that we have.
Okay, I'm going to play the role of press secretary and say last question.
Just one question.
Yeah, last question.
You made a great point about LNG. How do we get that offshore and start selling it. What's your steps to do that?
Well, I think Adam will have some views on this, but being a member of parliament from Calgary, we have views about our energy security. Pierre Poilievre has said we'll make quick decisions within 18 months on energy project decisions. We have to build confidence around investment for our energy sector, and the best way to do that is stop playing games with it. Right now, you have consultations and environmental considerations that are core to mandating those decisions. I think geopolitics should be one of those things that should factor into why Canada makes these decisions. Second, you're seeing Indigenous finance, First Nations finance, and private equity providing a once-in-a-generation opportunity for economic reconciliation with Canada's First Nations. And that is something we cannot turn away from. This is something we have to embrace with every part of our national fiber. Then you need to be able to find a way to attract the institutional investment in this city and to dispense with garbage ESG thinking that has been delaying Canadian energy from fighting the climate and from securing the world. And I think part of that requires confidence in a government to say, when decisions are made, they will be made permanent and costly on future governments to reverse.
What's preventing the gas from getting offshore?
I'm describing all of the considerations that are weighing down the potential for Canadian gas to get offshore. So I think building the pipelines, axing the tax, creating a strong investment environment, and making the quick decisions that the investment community needs to understand is core to what our Conservative government would do.
It's baffling. Okay, I have one more last question for each one of you before I hand it back to our friends at the Canadian Club. Why did you put your name on the ballot? Because you all have. It's not a frequent choice of young people with lots of options in their lives, but you all did it. So maybe I'll start with you, Sabrina, since it's such a recent decision for you.
Yeah, I touched on this a little bit before, but I'm part of the first generation in Canadian history to be worse off than their parents. And I think when you look at a question of whether a country is succeeding and moving forward and progressing or moving backward, it is that question. Is each generation a little bit better off? And that's not necessarily in terms of equal outcomes, but at least equal opportunity. And that's something we don't have right now. So it has been very personal, particularly with housing, cost of living. Someone who's looking at starting a family as a young person, I see these issues firsthand, and I've covered them firsthand for the National Post for years, heard so many people's stories, seen the pain, the frustration out there, and that's what made me want to put my name on my ballot. I also believe it's really important to have young voices in Ottawa, strong voices, fresh voices, who can re-energize our political sphere in general, but also the Conservative movement. And unfortunately, there are a lot of barriers to young people running. It is a big sacrifice. People starting in their careers or entering their prime earning years can't take time off to campaign full time necessarily. If you're a renter, you may not have been living in your community as long as someone else, or you might be switching ridings and not have those deep roots. Also just the knowledge about the nomination process. There was a study that actually came out by the University of Ottawa and University of Carleton this week that looked at why there's such a disproportionate number of older MPs in Ottawa versus those under 40. And what they found is once younger candidates are nominated, they tend to get elected, actually. But it's getting that nomination as the first step that is keeping younger people out of politics. I've been lucky enough through my work at the National Post to have a voice and an opportunity where I've had the support to start this campaign, and there's been a lot of energy around it. So I also felt it was on me to take that opportunity and hopefully become a voice for my generation in Ottawa.
I wanted to cease being an observer and be more of a participant. I feel incredibly blessed to be born in Canada. Like, despite all the discussions we have about how to make the country better and how sometimes things don't really feel like they're working, we still have the best country in the planet. The lineup of people who want to come here and seek a better life, it's, we don't have enough room to have everybody. We see this what's happened. Everyone wants to come here. I want a country for my kids that I feel like I grew up in, opportunity that they have, and I just wanted to be part of the movement.
Yeah, look, I'm Can you ditto this one? We have the best country in the world, and we're squandering opportunities every single day. Kid of an immigrant, uncredentialed engineer who had to drive a cab, put his wife through school so he can buy a house in a good neighborhood, send his kids to good public schools, and they can go from the front seat of a taxi to the front row of Parliament Hill in one generation. That's what this country's about. And we've got to make sure that the next version of that country is exactly the same, and that the opportunities are to the moon and back for everybody in the next generation. That's not happening today. And rather than squawking about it and shit posting on Twitter, I'm going to do something about it in, sorry.
It's accurate.
We're amongst friends here. But I'm going to do something about it. And I think that, having somebody with Pierre's vision, with Pierre's ability to sell that vision, to communicate that vision, and with the major book work that goes on to produce that vision, I think we have all of the ingredients to a recipe of a better Canada ahead.
I grew up in the community I represent now, and as I introduced myself to Conservatives, I would tell people, listen, I spent my early 20s with Preston Manning. I spent the last 13 years with Stephen Harper. I'm nothing like those guys. But I will walk in my own shoes and see what we can make of it, because our Conservative moment needs strong leaders of conviction. I spent time at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute, which is a beautiful nonpartisan space, very, very hard to accomplish in this polarized world, and saw the scale of issues that our country was dealing with that liberals and conservatives would agree with. Massive issues, foreign and domestic. And then I saw my friend, our leader, lead an emboldened and expanded conservative movement on our core principles with courage of conviction, with backbone, and said, hey, look, better do this now than regret not having done it 4 years from now. He needs allies and warriors to get the job done. And it was a slipstream ever since then until now. So it's restoring the promise of this country, as cheesy as it may sound. That is at the core of why I'm doing this.
Thank you.
Guys, you want to know something crazy? Shuv, Adam, and I all knew exactly what we were getting into, and we did it anyway.
Yeah. Well, that's why I asked.
You'll know soon.
Well, thank you so much for that. I think we more than met the demand, the very high demand for this panel tonight. And thank you to the Canadian Club for hosting us. And I think Michael will have a few words.
Thank you. Adam, Melissa, Shuv, Sabrina, on behalf of the Canadian Club, I want to thank you for the buzz and excitement you've created here tonight and this evening. This sold-out crowd is a testament to your individual abilities and your collective abilities to manage and meaningfully engage us in the issues that matter most to Canadians. So thank you. We enjoyed hearing about your vision for Canada and the plans that you have in place to deliver it. It's especially inspiring to hear such great messages of hope from young people when we don't hear that every day. So please continue that message, and we encourage you to keep using it. And you're welcome here anytime to the Canadian Club again. Wanted to thank again our sponsors, TD Bank, Jenny Byrne and Associates, Rogers, Canada Life, and TC Energy for making this possible. Adam, Melissa, and Shuv, I wish you continued success in your roles as MPs and in the campaign that is ahead. Sabrina, may your nomination campaign reap the reward of the hard work that you're sowing now. And to you, Ginny, our moderator, with mastery, you served an exciting panel and a witness to everyone here today. Thank you very much for guiding this important conversation. Before we continue networking, I would like to invite members and guests to visit our website at canadianclub.org to learn more about our upcoming events. I also wish to thank our AV supplier, VVC Live, for its incredible event support. Members and guests, thank you for joining us tonight, and enjoy the rest of your evening.